She didn't expect threats from the boss of the Korean Mafia, but soon she understood why it was necessary. Because he wanted her to help him commit the greatest crime. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. Enjoy watching. Jin-ho's life was built on money. It was the bricks in the walls of his power, the lifeblood of his empire. He didn't just manage it, he breathed it. His word was law in Seoul's underworld, and that law always rested on one simple truth. Everything has a price. Any problem can be solved if the right amount is found. And if someone refused to accept it, well, Jin-ho was willing to do anything to remind them of that, even if it meant involving those who didn't want to participate. And now he was faced with a problem on which everything depended. Someone, very clever and very cunning, stole an astronomical sum from his accounts and, before escaping, managed to lock them. Locked not with just numbers, but with a very long code. This code, the only key to returning the money, was printed on a piece of paper and hidden in a safe. Not a bank safe, but a very ordinary, small safe, located in a building that had nothing to do with Jin-ho's world. It was brilliant and crazy. Looking for a mafia boss in a blind date cafe? It was like looking for a shark in a kiddie pool. The cafe was called Quiet Whisper. A cozy place with dim lighting where lonely hearts could meet without first seeing each other's faces. A world built on feelings, on sincerity, on the search for connection. Everything that was the opposite of Jin-ho's world. But Jin-ho saw no obstacles. He saw a goal. He needed to get into this cafe, find the safe, and open it without attracting attention. How? Become a shadow. Become part of the decor. And so he conceived a plan. He will come there as a client, as one of those looking for love. The thought was so absurd that he almost chuckled in the empty office space overlooking Seoul at night. But there was no other choice. His men, rough and conspicuous, with faces on which the history of every fight was written like an open book, would look like elephants in a china shop there. No. He had to do it himself. Alone. The next day. A tense silence reigned in his office, which resembled a sterile operating room more than a living space. He sat at a massive black wood desk, and several large screens glowed on the wall in front of him. On them were dossiers, several faces, several fates, several possible clues to his problem. His men, the ones who had terrorized entire neighborhoods, now stood at attention, awaiting his decision. They had found safe-cracking specialists. 3 options. The first was a young upstart hacker who boasted he could hack anything with a laptop. Too loud, too conspicuous, Jin-ho waved him off. The second was an old man, a thief-in-law of the old school, a master of lock-picking and hearing, but he was ill, his hands shaking. Unreliable. The third file made him slow down. A photograph of a woman in her 30s. A calm face, intelligent eyes staring straight into the camera. The name was Lee Amy. Her file contained no high-profile cases, only dry lines. Security technician. Work with mechanical and electronic locking systems. But between the lines, his people saw something else. The real deal. She didn't just work. She was one of the best. A ghost who could open any door without leaving a trace. But with a note. Sobered up a few years ago. Leads a quiet life. Works as an illustrator. An illustrator? Jin-ho said quietly, the ice in his glass of whiskey clinking softly. Yes, boss, one of the assistants quickly replied. Children's books. Clean as a whistle, no connections to our world. Why did she leave? Jin-ho asked, not taking his eyes off her photograph. There's no exact information. They say she left for reasons of principle. She didn't want to be involved in dirty dealings anymore. Jin-ho's mouth twitched. Considerations of principle. Words that carried no weight with him. Principles were a luxury he couldn't afford. She's right for us, he concluded. They won't suspect her. She doesn't have any unnecessary connections, and she's weak. She has something to lose. The next question was crucial: how to lure her, how to compel the ghost to return to her old life and do one final, most important job. Elle and Amy had been actively looking for a relationship lately. She'd been looking at dating sites, going on speed dating. She was trying to build a new, normal life, a lone wolf yearning for a pack. And at that moment, one of the junior assistants, the guy who was keeping an eye on Quiet Whisper, said hesitantly, "Boss, this cafe? It's just for that kind of person. For singles. They have blind dates there." Jinho's mind, all the details came together to form a single, flawless picture. The place where the code was hidden, and the person capable of obtaining it. He just needed to bring them together. The situation itself suggested the way, like a river pointing its course. "Make sure she knows about this place," Jinho ordered quietly. His voice was calm, but there was a steely determination in it. "I don't want to know how. Use everything. Do it gracefully. She must decide for herself to come there. Feel like it's her choice." His men nodded and got out. The machine started. They didn't break down doors or make threats. They were more subtle. The algorithms of the dating sites she frequented suddenly began persistently suggesting profiles of a certain Min Ho, a lonely manager with a quiet demeanor and a love of art. Her friend, unaware that her account had been briefly used, mentioned in a casual conversation, "I heard the atmosphere at Tiki Whisper is really warm. A friend of mine found a couple there." A brochure for the cafe accidentally ended up in her mailbox among other advertising flyers. For Ami, it seemed like a string of happy coincidences, a sign from fate. Tired of loneliness, of computer screens, and lonely evenings with brushes and paints, she saw it as a sign. She registered for a date at Quiet Whisper and received confirmation that her date would be that very same Ming Ho. They did everything possible and impossible, and they succeeded. As for that girl, long ago, in another life, Leah Mi was not an illustrator, but a ghost. Her world consisted not of bright colors and fairy tales, but of titanium bolts, magnetic locks, gears, and the quiet hum of electronic circuit boards. Her fingers, now accustomed to holding a brush, once sensed with incredible sensitivity the slightest vibration of a master key in a lock. Her ear, now attuned to the melodies of jazz. Maijis distinguished the barely audible clicks of turning Suvald. She was the best in her field. Her name, unknown to anyone, was legendary in certain circles. They called her the Shadow, and any door, any safe, was merely a temporary obstacle for her. But one day, something inside her broke. Not suddenly, but slowly, like rusting metal. She realized that her talent, her art, had always served someone else's dark purposes. Theft, blackmail, industrial espionage. Every click of the lock opening was not a victory, but another step deeper into the shadows. Her life was sterile and soulless, like an empty safe. At night, she was haunted by images of other people's frightened eyes, other people's ruined lives, to which she, however indirectly, had contributed. And she left. Abruptly and irrevocably. She changed her name, cut all ties. Her hands, capable of deceiving the most complex systems, reached for her easel. She found solace in creating worlds, not in hacking them. In the world of children's books, there was no betrayal, greed, or fear. There were dragons that could be tamed with kindness, and princesses whose strength lay in their intelligence and courage. This was her escape, her redemption. But escaping the past didn't fill the void in the present. She was lonely. Years of living in the shadows had taught her mistrust. Loneliness had become her cocoon. But over the years, the cocoon grew too small. She longed for simple human warmth. To be greeted in the evening by not just the quiet scratch of a pen on paper, but by someone's voice, someone's smile. To have someone to share a cup of morning coffee with and laugh at a stupid joke on TV. She tried. God, how she tried. She signed up for dating sites, attended meetups organized by friends. But it was useless. The men she met seemed shallow. One talked only about money, another about cars. A third, at first glance, only wanted a beautiful companion for going out to restaurants. But she, over the years of living as the Shadow, had learned to see right through people. She read micro-expressions on faces, heard falseness in intonations, sensed hidden intentions. Her past, from which she had fled, had given her a heightened, almost paranoid perception, which now prevented her from building simple human happiness. And yet she didn't give up. Amy was a fighter by nature. If a lock couldn't be picked, a key could be found. She believed that her key, the one person who would understand her complex, wounded soul, was out there somewhere. And to find it, she had to act, sitting at home and waiting for the weather to clear. That wasn't her thing. She decided to meet her destiny head-on, no matter how many times it took. And then, one of those days, when hope began to fade little by little, that very coincidence happened. She was walking down the street, lost in thought, mulling over an illustration for a new book about a tiny cloud searching for a home. The air was crisp, the city humming with its usual life. Suddenly, her ear, still sensitive to important sounds, caught a snatch of conversation between two girls passing by. "And you can't even see who's in front of you," one said excitedly. "Really? Aren't you scared?" asked another. "No, it's so cool. You communicate only through words. No photos, no preconceptions. Just conversation, just like the old days. The place is called Quiet Whisper down that alley." And then the girls, laughing, quickened their pace, and their voices disappeared into the city hubbub. Amy froze in place, as if struck by electricity. Her heart began to beat faster. This wasn't just a conversation. It was an answer, a sign. You communicate only through words. No prejudices. Exactly what she needed. A place where she wouldn't be judged by her appearance, where there would be no place for fake smiles for photos, where everything would be decided by only one thing, a sincere conversation. There, in this silence and darkness, her past would have no meaning. Her present, her drawings, wouldn't either. There would be only voices, only souls. She couldn't pass up such a chance. What if this really was a sign from heaven? What if her destiny was waiting for her right there, in this quiet whisper? Beside herself, she almost ran home. Her fingers trembled as she typed the name of the cafe into the search engine. There was the website. Minimalistic. Calm. The rules were anonymity, respect, live communication only. She immediately registered and filled out the form, trying to be as honest as possible. Illustrator. I love silence, jazz, and sincerity. The system offered her several profiles, and one of them, of a certain Min Ho, caught her eye. Manager. I value order and tranquility, seeking deep communication. Nothing pretentious, nothing superfluous, like a breath of fresh air after the pushy pickup artists on dating sites. She confirmed the meeting, and all the following days she lived in sweet trepidation. She sorted through dresses, rehearsed possible conversation topics, wondered what his voice would be like. For the first time in a long time, she felt not fear of meeting someone new, but hope. Real hope, bright as the yellow paint on her palette. The calculation was flawless, like a chess game where every move is calculated 20 times in advance. Jinho's people didn't just know what time and day Amy would be at Quiet Whisper. They ensured that no other female profile would be approved by the system for that time slot. They turned a romantic accident into a programmed operation. Jinho stood in the shadows across the street, watching Amy approach the cafe entrance. She looked completely different from the old photo from the file. Not a shadow, but a lively, excited person. She adjusted her dress, took a deep breath, and disappeared through the door. There was a trembling hope in her movements that cut him to the quick. He felt a strange, forgotten taste of shame, but immediately suppressed it. Emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford. He entered exactly a minute after her. It was enough time for her to be shown to her table, and she had time to get her bearings in solitude, feeling a slight twinge of disappointment that her destiny was late. And just as that disappointment was beginning to dawn, he appeared. His plan was simple and brilliant. Not just to show up, but to create an effect. He was to become not just a man, but the embodiment of her expectations. An illusion woven from her own desires. He walked to her table in the semi-darkness, his steps silent, yet confident. Not stealthy. He sat down, and before she could speak, his voice, low, velvety, and perfectly placed, filled the space between them. "Sorry I'm late. I hope you're not disappointed," he said. And those simple words held such a calculated dose of charm and slight guilt that she instantly melted away. And then the performance began. An hour that flew by for Amy, but for Jinho, dragged on like an eternity. He wasn't just talking, he was leading a symphony. He said exactly what a loving girl dreaming of a deep relationship would want to hear. But for Amy, every word was spot on. He spoke of the value of sincerity in a world of masks. He spoke of how tired he was of superficial connections. He asked her questions about her work, and he didn't just nod, he delved into it. When she talked about the colors she used to convey emotions, he asked, "What is the color of hope?" The question was so unexpected and profound that she paused for a second. "Yellow," she finally breathed out, like the first ray of sunshine after a long night. "Beautiful," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "And for me, hope is the color of the silence before dawn. Dark blue, almost black, but it already holds the promise of light." It was a lie, artfully woven, laced with the poison of verisimilitude. He'd studied her profiles, read her creative blog, and knew which strings to tug at her heartstrings. He was a mirror reflecting back to her her ideal. He told fictional stories from the life of Ming Ho, a manager tired of corporate games. The stories were filled with metaphors about the search for authenticity and the importance of trust. His voice, masculine and pleasant, enveloped her, removing all protective barriers. He wasn't intrusive. He was reliable. A rock to lean on. Ami listened, her heart opening like a bud in warm rain. She hung on his every word, and the same triumphant inner monologue echoed in her soul. He's real. He's the one. He understands. He feels the same way I do. He masterfully avoided direct questions about himself, turning the conversation to her. He made her feel like the most interesting, the most desirable, the most understood woman in the world. In that hour, he'd built an invisible bridge between them, and Amy was almost on his side. And now the climax had arrived. The one she'd been waiting for from the very beginning, but now with not impatience, but delight. The cafe owner announced that the main lights would now turn on, and the couples would be able to see each other. Amy froze. Her palms were sweating. She was beaming from within, her smile so wide and happy that it seemed about to burst from her face and float toward the ceiling like a balloon. She was absolutely certain her man was sitting across from her. Now she would see the face that would become the face of her happiness. She closed her eyes for a second, like a child about to have a wish come true. And the light was turned on. Soft, but already bright enough to dispel the mystery. She slowly opened her eyes and her gaze fell on him. And the world froze. The man sitting before her wasn't just a handsome man. He was a masterpiece. Stately, with perfect posture, dressed in simple but impeccably tailored black clothes, dark jeans and a thin sweater that revealed the contours of his toned body, his face. It had clear, almost chiseled features. High cheekbones, a strong chin, lips pressed into a thin, confident line. And glasses, with thin metal frames that lent his piercing, dark gaze a touch of intellectual coolness. He looked exactly as she had imagined him in her wildest fantasies. Even better, he was the embodiment of masculinity, intelligence, and that same controlled strength she felt in his voice. Stunned, dazzled, she couldn't take her eyes off him. Her heart pounded so hard, it was hard to breathe. This wasn't just sympathy. It was an instant, all-consuming feeling. A lightning bolt. She fell in love. Fell in love with this picture, with this ideal created for her. "Well?" he said. His voice, the same velvety, deep one, now sounding in a new, visible frame. "I hope reality hasn't disappointed you." She just shook her head, unable to utter a word. Her cheeks were flushed. She felt like Cinderella, finally seeing her prince. He smiled. It was perfect. Not too broad, not too demure. Calculated. But she, blinded, didn't see the calculation. She saw the reciprocal feeling. "And you're even more beautiful than I imagined," he said, looking at her. And his gaze was heavy, piercing. He drank in her beauty, her naive radiance. At that moment, Amy was absolutely happy. All her lonely evenings, all her failed dates, all her doubts, it all faded into the background and took on meaning. It was all for this meeting. She had found him. The idol was complete, crystalline, radiant. And at that very moment, when her heart was wide open, he uttered the next phrase, calmly, in the same gentle tone, as if offering her a piece of pie. Now, darling, do something for me. Reach under the table and look at what's in my lap. Quickly, and no unnecessary questions. She froze for a moment, thinking it was some strange joke. Maybe he wanted to give her a small gift? A flower? A note? Her lips stretched into a shy, expectant smile. She was ready to play his games. With a playful, expectant look, she leaned a little lower and peered into the space beneath the tabletop, and her smile froze, then slowly slid off her face like a mask. Another second, and her lips twisted into a silent grimace of horror. From beneath a neatly folded napkin on his knee, the short, matte barrel of a pistol peeked out. It was pointed directly at her stomach. His fingers rested confidently on the grip, his finger along the trigger guard. Professional, ready for action. Ami's world, so bright and warm just a moment ago, collapsed in an instant. The sounds of the cafe, laughter, music, the clink of dishes, turned into a deafening, oppressive roar. Her temples pounded, and her vision darkened. She alternated between intense heat and icy cold. She nearly knocked over her glass of water, clutching the edge of the table frantically to keep from collapsing to the floor. He watched her reaction with the same calm, almost scientific interest. "See?" he said, his voice no longer velvety. It became low, metallic, and utterly indifferent. "Now we have a mutual understanding." He gave her a couple of seconds to realize this. "You have a choice," he continued, without changing his tone. "It's not difficult. Option 1. You quietly, calmly, and without hysteria do everything I say. Option 2? He paused, and a cold fire flashed in his eyes. "You will suffer, and you're not the only one. See those lucky people around you?" He nodded slightly toward the audience. "That couple whispering about love, those girls celebrating. I can create such hell here that only memories will remain of this cozy nest. And you know what's most interesting? You will be the one to blame for everything. Your purse, your history, everything will point to you. Your past, shadow, will play a cruel joke on you. You will be judged. And for the next 20 years, a concrete cell will be your home. You will remember this evening and wish you could have simply agreed." He spoke methodically, deliberately, burning every word into her mind. This wasn't the ravings of a maniac. This was cold, precise calculation, and she understood. Every word he said could be trusted. He wasn't bluffing. He was the force that could wipe her life and the lives of innocent people into dust without blinking an eye. "First you make a choice." His voice brought her back to the icy reality. "And then I'll tell you what I need. And believe me, compared to prison, it will seem like a mere trifle. So?" A spasm gripped her throat. She couldn't breathe. She tried to find a way out, a loophole, but everywhere there was only the smooth, polished wall of his will. She was trapped, a plaything in the hands of the one she had considered her destiny just a moment ago. Tears, bitter and humiliating, welled up in her eyes. She swallowed them, clenching her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. She didn't want to cry in front of him. She didn't want to show how much he'd broken her. Her voice, when she finally forced herself to speak, was quiet, strained, and alien. A tremor coursed through it in waves. I agree. Do whatever you say." He nodded slowly, and something like satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "Smart girl, smart choice." He removed his hand from the weapon, and she heard a quiet but distinct click. The safety. But the threat didn't go away. It hung in the air, heavy and inexorable. Ami sat, unable to move. Her mind raced in panic, snatching up fragments of thoughts. Who is he? What does he want? Why me? And the most bitter of all, I came here myself. I believed him so much. I allowed this monster into my life. She already regretted it. She regretted ever deciding to fight for her happiness. She regretted believing in a sign from above. She regretted not staying home, in the safety of her lonely but predictable world. That risk, that attempt at a blind date, had turned into the worst nightmare of her life. The idol was dead, the harmony shattered, and before her sat not a handsome prince, but a cold, calculating thief of her hopes and, perhaps, her future. And she, trembling and dejected, was forced to wait to see what his next command would be. He watched her for a few seconds, his gaze heavy and assessing, as if he were testing the strength of the material he had just broken. "Okay," he finally said, his voice once again taking on that businesslike, impersonal tone that was now far more frightening than any shout. "Since we agreed, here's your task. You were the best in this city, the best when it came to combination locks and security systems. Shadow," he said the nickname without indignation, without respect, simply as a statement of technical specifications. "I need you to live up to that title, right now." He paused, letting the inevitability sink in. "There's a safe in the basement of this establishment. I need the paper inside. It has numbers written on it. Numbers for my encrypted accounts." He chose his words carefully, not revealing too much, but making clear the importance of the contents. "You have 20 minutes from the moment we get down." 20 minutes. The number sounded like a death sentence. Amy felt her professional instincts, her knowledge, which she hadn't touched for years, stir in the depths of her consciousness, but they were crushed under a heavy, leaden weight of fear. I haven't done this in a long time," she tried to object, her voice breaking into a whisper. "I don't remember all the nuances. Models change. I haven't practiced it, just like a blacksmith doesn't forge a sword, but the muscle memory remains," he retorted coldly. "And your mind? It's still there too. 20 minutes. No more." He leaned a little closer across the table, and his face, so beautiful and so inhuman, was centimeters away from her. "And me?" His voice grew quieter, but that only made it more piercing. "It's better for you not to know what will happen if you fail. Trust me. The bitterness of prison porridge will seem like honey compared to what I have prepared for you and for everyone in this building. I do not tolerate failure, especially in such delicate matters." There were no direct threats in his words. There were no descriptions of torture or reprisals. But it was precisely this icy, absolute certainty of his impunity and ability to inflict unspeakable pain that made her shudder. He wasn't threatening, he was warning. Like an engineer warning of deadly voltage in the power grid. "Stand up," he commanded softly, but not allowing for argument. "Come on! Act natural! Smile! To everyone around us, we're just a couple looking for a secluded spot." She rose mechanically. Her legs were weak and unresponsive. He stood next to her, and his hand rested on her waist. His touch was firm, commanding, controlling her every movement. It said, "You are my property, you are my tool, and a broken tool is thrown away." They moved toward an inconspicuous door at the back of the hall, behind which, she assumed, lay the stairs to the basement. He opened it and let her go first. For a second, his hand disappeared from her waist, and a wild, irrational thought flashed through her mind. To run, to scream. But she immediately remembered the pistol hidden in his jacket pocket and his words about the other patrons. She was a hostage not only to him, but also to her own conscience. The staircase was narrow and steep, lit by a single dim bulb. The air smelled of dust, damp concrete, and old wood. As she descended, she felt her professional self slowly and reluctantly awaken. Her gaze automatically slid along the walls, assessing the wiring, searching for motion sensors, old habits that are impossible to break. The basement was cramped. There were shelves full of supplies, old chairs, and boxes. And in the very corner, hidden under a rough cloth, lay the very object of her mission. He pulled the cloth back. A safe stood before her, not the most modern, but solid and heavy. A mechanical lock with a combination panel. Her brain, clouded by fear just a second ago, began to work. The model, she recognized it. Granite 7. Reliable as a rock, but even rocks have cracks. 20 minutes, he reminded her again, moving to the foot of the stairs, blocking her escape route. He pulled out his phone to keep track of the time. "Go ahead." Amy slowly approached the safe. Her fingers, trembling with fear, touched the cold metal surface. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to push away the panic. She had to concentrate. Remember everything. Remember the sensations, the sounds, the very magic that once made her a shadow. She pressed her ear to the door, her fingers resting on the handle. The first thing she needed to do was understand the mechanism. Hear it. Hear the quiet, barely audible dialogue of gears and levers inside this steel box. The world narrowed to that sound, to the vibrations in her fingertips. She began to slowly, barely noticeably, turn the handle, listening to every click, every fading hum. She forgot about the man with the gun, forgot about 20 minutes, forgot about her fear. There was only her and the lock, the ancient battle between the one who wants to hide and the one who knows how to find. She sank into a trance, into that state of complete concentration that had once made her a genius. Her body remembered. Her fingers moved on their own, reading invisible clues. She heard the levers whispering to each other, felt the moment when they aligned in the right combination. He watched her without moving. His face remained impassive, but in his glasses' hidden eyes, perhaps a shadow of respect for a skill that the years hadn't been able to erase flickered. 10 minutes passed. 15. Amy was all ears, beads of sweat breaking out on her forehead. She was already close. All that remained was to find the final decisive number, and suddenly her finger felt a subtle but distinct click. Her heart sank. This was the wrong combination. She had made a mistake. Time was running out. She pulled away to begin again, and her gaze fell on the man's face. He hadn't said a word, but his silence was more eloquent than any threat. It said, "Time is running out. Remember the consequences." Mustering all her willpower, Amy immersed herself in her work again. Now her movements were faster, more confident. She used the error to better understand the system, and at the 18th minute, she heard that long-awaited, dull click. A quiet, yet oh-so-desired sound of victory. She slowly turned the handle. The safe door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, on the shelf, lay a single piece of paper. She reached out and took it. Rows of numbers were written on it. A code. The key to his money, to his power, and to her freedom. She turned and silently handed him the piece of paper. Her hands began to tremble again, but this time from nervous exhaustion and the realization of what she had just done. She had returned to her old life. She had become a shadow once again. And the price for this return was still unknown. He slowly raised his eyes to Amy. She stood leaning against a bookcase, her face pale, her eyes empty. She looked as if she had just completed a long, grueling journey, not spent 20 minutes in a quiet basement. Her posture was so emptiness and detachment that for a moment it evoked an unfamiliar, aching feeling in him. Not gratitude, no. Rather, an awareness of the price another person had paid for his victory. And then he uttered a phrase that in his world was considered the height of generosity and recognition. The law of the bargain, unshakable as a rock. "You did it," he stated. "You deserve a reward. Name a sum. Any amount. I'll give it to you." He expected to see a flash of greed, relief, calculation in her eyes. Perhaps hesitation as she calculated how much she could squeeze out. In his world, everything had a price, and every person had one. He was prepared to hear an astronomical figure. He was ready for it. It would be a sign that he understood her, that they ultimately played by the same rules. But Amy shook her head slowly. She did so without the slightest hesitation, as if she were refusing not money but a cup of poison. "No." Her voice was quiet, but absolutely firm. There was no fear or challenge in it. There was only a tired, icy clarity. "I don't need your money." He looked at her with genuine amazement. It was beyond his comprehension. "There's always a price. Everything can be bought and sold," he said, as if it were an axiom. "Not everything." She looked him straight in the eye, and in her gaze he saw not shadow, not a frightened girl, but that very same children's book illustrator who believed in good dragons. "I don't need money earned through deception and fear." She straightened up, pushing off the bookcase. Her entire figure expressed one thing, an overwhelming desire to be as far away from him as possible, from this basement, from the memories of this evening. "And I did what you forced me to do to save myself and these people. This is the end of our relationship." And without waiting for his answer, without looking at him again, she turned and headed for the stairs. Her steps were quick and determined, not from fear now, but from a deep physical need to cleanse herself of his presence. Jin-ho stood and watched her go, the crumpled piece of paper with the numbers clutched in his hand. He had everything he wanted. His problem was solved. His power and wealth were secure. But in the silence of the dusty basement, the sound of her retreating footsteps haunted him, soft yet more deafening than any gunshot. She had abandoned his rules, his world, his money. And for the first time in years, he felt not like an all-powerful boss, but a loser. He'd won the battle, but he'd lost something bigger, something he couldn't even fully comprehend. He was left alone with his money, and she was gone, taking with her her silent contempt, which proved more valuable than any ransom. As she turned and walked toward the stairs, something inside him tightened sharply and painfully. It wasn't just anger or a desire to control everything. It was something else entirely. He looked at her back, at the way she held her head, and knew he would never meet a woman like her again. He liked more than just her face. He liked what was inside, the strength that made her refuse money, her calm voice when she said he didn't need his money. In his world, everything was fake. Smiles, words, friendship, but she was real, alive. And this life, this truth, was very little in his cold world, and this thought seemed to him more valuable than all the money in his accounts. He didn't think, he simply followed her. His legs carried him forward on their own. He caught up with her on the stairs, taking them two at a time. "Stop," he said, and his voice sounded less like an order and more like a request. Amy turned around halfway. She looked down at him. There was no fear in her eyes now, only weariness and a wall of utter indifference. "What else?" she asked quietly. "You got what you wanted." Jin-ho paused. He didn't know how to ask. He only knew how to take or command. Words came with difficulty. I can't just let you go," he said. A look of mild disdain crossed her face. "You want to force me to stay? With a gun again?" "No," he answered sharply, and it sounded sincere. Give me a second chance." She stared at him unblinkingly, and he felt completely exposed, like a boy caught in a brutal lie. "A second chance?" She laughed softly, but there was no joy in it. "After you pointed a gun at me? After you threatened me and innocent people? After you turned my evening into a nightmare?" She shook her head. "No. A person capable of such a thing doesn't deserve a second chance. At least, not that simple." She took a step up to leave, but stopped again and looked at him, her gaze firm. "If a man like you really wants something, if he really wants the attention of a woman like me, then he'll have to earn it. Make me want to see him. Make me want to even look at him after everything that's happened. And so far, you've done the opposite." He listened to her, and each word fell on him like a heavy stone. He was the boss. His word was law. He was feared. And this girl, who had been trembling with fear half an hour ago, now stood before him and calmly told him the truth to his face. And in that truth lay a power against which his authority and his pistol were useless. He found no words to respond. Everything he could offer, money, threats, force, was useless here. He was faced with something completely new and incomprehensible. He just looked at her silently. Ami didn't wait any longer. She turned and walked up the stairs. The door to the hall opened and closed, and she was gone. Jin-ho didn't run after her. He didn't order his men to stop her. He remained standing on the stairs in the dark basement, alone, with a piece of paper in his hand. He knew she was right. He didn't know how to earn attention. He never deserved anything from anyone. He always took what he wanted, but now he was faced with something he couldn't take by force. This girl could only be had in one way, if she wanted it herself. And for the first time in his life, he realized that he wanted someone to want him not out of fear or money, but just like that. He slowly walked upstairs and left the cafe. His car was waiting for him at the curb. He sat in the back seat and looked out the window, thinking about her words, "To make me want to see him myself." It was the most difficult task he'd ever faced in his life, and he didn't yet know if he was ready to tackle it. But he knew one thing: he couldn't simply forget about it. Several weeks passed. Amy tried to return to her normal life. She worked on new illustrations, met with friends, went shopping. But something inside was broken. She stopped dating. The very thought of meeting a stranger in the dark again made her nauseous. Now, when she walked around the city, her eyes would automatically search the crowd for the tall, bespectacled man. Every sharp sound made her flinch. She tried to forget that evening, like a bad dream. But the memories were too vivid. The cold metal of the gun under the table, his calm voice, threatening her and innocent people. The horror in the basement when she heard the clock ticking. She thought the worst was over. She'd complied with his demands and managed to leave. She was sure he'd disappear from her life forever. He'd gotten what he wanted, but Amy was wrong. Jin-ho hadn't disappeared. He was watching. That was his way of doing things: study, understand, and then act. And now he was studying her. He had no clear plan. He had only one desire: to be near her again, to hear her voice, to see how she lived. He sat in his black car with tinted windows, parked across the street from her house. He watched her leave the building in the morning, buy coffee at the nearby cafe, and go about her business. He saw that she was always alone. He noticed that she no longer went to cafes for dates. He followed her for several days. He learned her schedule. In the mornings, she worked from home. During the day, she often went to the library or to an art store to buy paints. In the evenings, she sometimes met up with friends or simply walked in the park. He did it carefully. He changed cars. He never came close. He was like a shadow. One day, he followed her to the park. She was sitting on a bench with a notebook, drawing something. He watched her from behind the trees. He saw how concentrated she was, how she sometimes put down her pencil and simply looked at the people, at the children playing on the playground. Her face had a calm yet slightly sad expression. At that moment, he realized he had shattered that peace. He had brought fear into her life, and now he lay in wait, like a criminal, disturbing her peace once again. He didn't know what to do next. His plan was simple: watch, maybe find a weak spot, see if he could reappear in her life. But how? He couldn't just walk up to her and say, "Hi." She'd run away or call the police. He thought about her words in the basement. Make me want to see him myself. It seemed impossible. How could he make her want that after what he'd done? He saw her living her simple, honest life. A life with no place for guns, threats, or deception, and he, sitting in his expensive car, felt like a monster, dirty and unworthy. But he couldn't stop. Her image drew him like a magnet. Her strength, her purity, her truth, everything he never had and never would have. One evening, Amy was walking home from the store with a bag of groceries. She stopped at the corner to let cars pass. Suddenly, she felt someone's gaze on her. The sensation was so strong that it sent shivers down her spine. She turned around abruptly. Several people were standing across the street, some talking on the phone, others waiting for the bus. No one was looking at her, but the feeling of being watched, didn't go away. She walked home quickly, looking back frequently. It seemed to her that she'd seen the same black sedan several times in the last few days, but she'd paid it no mind. Now, however, disturbing thoughts began to creep into her head. "It's paranoia," she told herself as she walked into her building. "Just nerves. He forgot about you a long time ago. He has his own things to do." She slammed the apartment door and turned the lock. She felt a little calmer. But she was wrong. Jin-ho was sitting in his car 2 blocks from her house, staring at his phone. One of his men had sent a photo. Amy was entering the building, her face tense. He knew he couldn't go on like this forever. Sooner or later, she would notice him, or his people, or she would simply go mad with fear. But he also knew he couldn't just walk away. He needed to find a way to become a different person, a person she might want to see. In the meantime, he continued with his plan. A plan that consisted of only one thing: watch and wait. Wait for the right moment, which he knew might never come. A few more days passed. Ami tried to live her life as usual, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. She checked her back as she walked down the street. When leaving the house, she kept a close eye on the parked cars. One day after work, she stopped by a small flower shop near her home. She wanted to buy some flowers to lift her spirits. She spent a long time choosing, looking at the roses, but then sighed and left without buying anything. She'd simply spent a lot on paint and paper that month, and she didn't have enough money for flowers. Jin-ho saw it from his car. He sat behind the wheel and watched her. He saw her enter the store, stare at the flowers for a long time, and then leave empty-handed. He thought she didn't have enough money. For him, it was simple. If someone needs something but doesn't have the money, you give them the money, or buy it for them. He waited until she left, then went into the same shop. He didn't know anything about flowers. He simply pointed to the largest and most expensive bouquet they had, a bouquet of white roses and some exotic flowers. He paid cash, without looking at the price. That evening, he drove up to her house. He knew which apartment she was in. He went up to her floor, quickly placed the bouquet right by the door, knocked, and immediately left. He went down the stairs, got into his car, and drove away. A few minutes later, Amy opened the door. She wanted to take out the trash, and almost stepped on the bouquet. She stopped and looked at it in surprise. She picked it up. There was no card. No one knew her address except her close friends. And they wouldn't just leave such an expensive gift by the door. Her first thought was that it was a mistake. Maybe the courier had gotten the address wrong. But then she remembered that black car, and the feeling of being watched. And she felt uneasy. She brought the bouquet into the apartment and placed it in water. The flowers were beautiful, but she couldn't enjoy them. She thought about how he had entered her life again, quietly and unnoticed. The next day, she was walking down the street and stopped in front of a clothing store window. There was a beautiful evening dress there, dark blue, simple, yet very elegant. She looked at it for a few minutes. He would have loved to wear it to an event, but she sighed again and moved on. The dress was very expensive. She couldn't afford it. Jin-ho saw it again. He was sitting in the cafe across the street. He saw her looking at the dress. He saw her upset face when she left. He went straight to the store. He found that very dress in the display case. He asked the salesperson to wrap it for him. He didn't even ask the size. He just bought it. Ami's door again. It contained the same dress. And again, no card. Now Amy had no doubts. It was him. He watched her every move. He saw what she wanted but couldn't buy. And then he bought it for her. First the flowers, now the dress. She sat on a chair in the kitchen and looked at the dress. She was afraid. But along with the fear came another feeling. She remembered her words in the basement. If a man like you really wants something, then he'll have to earn it. And she understood. It was his attempt to earn her. Of course, it was a very strange and clumsy one, buying expensive things instead of a real apology. But for someone from his world, it was probably the only way he knew. Money and power. She decided not to give in to fear. She decided to see how far he was willing to go. A few days later, Amy caught a cold. She had a runny nose and a sore throat. She didn't want to leave the house, but she needed to buy medicine. She went to the pharmacy, bought the essentials, and returned home. Jin-ho, as usual, was keeping an eye on her. He saw that she looked ill. He saw the small pharmacy bag in her hands. He went into the same pharmacy. He approached the clerk and said, "Give me everything I need for a cold, every possible medicine." He didn't know the names. He simply bought everything: cough syrups, fever tablets, throat sprays, vitamins. He paid for a huge bag and carried it to her door. This time, Amy was home. She heard footsteps at her door and a soft knock. She walked up to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. She opened the door and saw a large bag full of medication. She picked it up and carried it inside. She stood in the middle of the room, looking at the package. And suddenly, she couldn't help but smile. It was so stupid, so ridiculous. He, a dangerous mafia boss, running around the city like a messenger, buying her flowers, dresses, and cold medicine. Did he think this would help her forgive him? And then it dawned on her. She realized she held a key in her hands. He was watching her, but she, too, could now influence him. She could control his actions. She remembered her words. To make me want to see him myself. He tried as best he could, but his methods were both funny and terrifying, and she decided to play this game. She decided to give him a chance. Not because she forgave him, but out of curiosity, out of a desire to see what would happen next, and maybe to show him that her world operates by different rules. The next day, she made a decision. She got dressed and left the house. She knew he was somewhere nearby. She went to a large shopping center. She went into an expensive electronics store. She approached the salesperson, a young man. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "A man is coming to pick me up. You'll recognize him. He'll look very serious. Dark clothes, probably. Could you give him a message from me?" The consultant nodded in surprise. "What should I tell you?" he asked. "Tell him," Amy said, trying to speak clearly, "that I'm expecting him this evening, at the restaurant across from this shopping center, at 6 o'clock. She thanked the salesperson and quickly left the store. She didn't look back. She simply walked home, her heart pounding. She'd made her move. Now it was his turn. Jin-ho, as expected, followed her into the mall. He saw her enter an electronics store. He waited a moment near the entrance, then went inside. He began searching for her among the shelves. A young consultant approached him. "Excuse me, sir," the guy said, a little nervously. "This is for you. The girl who just left asked me to give it to you." Jin-ho frowned. He took the small piece of paper from the boy's hands. It contained only a few words. "See you today at 6 p.m. at the restaurant across the street." He stood and looked at the note. At first, he didn't believe it. Then he thought it was a trap. Maybe she called the police? Maybe she wanted revenge on him? But then he looked at the words again. "Waiting for you." Not come, but waiting for you. These were the words he wanted. The phrase he hoped to hear someday. He left the store and got into his car. He looked at the note. He didn't know what awaited him. But he knew one thing: he would go. Because she herself had called him. And for him, that was more important than all the money in the world. He looked at his watch. 6 o'clock was still a few hours away. He needed to decide how he would approach this meeting. For the first time in a long time, he felt less like the master of the situation, and more like a man who had received an invitation from a woman. And this feeling was new and strange to him. Amy sat at home and thought about what she had done. She had invited the man who had held her hostage at gunpoint to dinner. She was alternately scared and excited. She didn't know if he would come, and she didn't know what would happen if he did. But she was ready to look him in the eye and tell him everything she thought about him. And maybe, just maybe, see if there was more to him than just a brutal mafia boss. The game has begun. Jin-ho arrived at the restaurant promptly at 6. He wasn't wearing his usual black suit, but simple dark jeans and a sweater. He wanted to look ordinary, but he was failing miserably. His posture, his hard gaze, his pursed lips, everything betrayed a man accustomed to power and danger. He saw her immediately. She was sitting at a table by the window. A glass of water stood in front of her, and she was looking out onto the street. His heart began to beat faster. He took a deep breath and approached. "Ami," he said quietly. She turned her head. Her face was calm, but he saw tension in her eyes. "You've arrived," she said. "Sit down." He sat down across from her. An awkward silence fell between them. The waiter came over and took their order. Amy ordered a salad and fish. Jin-ho just ordered black coffee. He wasn't interested in food right now. "Why did you call me?" he asked finally. "Is this a trap? Did you call the police?" Amy shook her head. "No police. I just want to talk, and I want you to understand something." "What exactly?" he asked. "You think you can buy everything," she said bluntly. "Flowers, dresses, medicine. You think gifts can erase what you've done, but they can't." He looked at her without looking away. "I don't know how else to do it," he admitted honestly. "I get it," Amy said. "That's why I'm here, to show you how things can be different." She took a sip of water. "You scared me to death. You threatened me and innocent people. You made me do something I didn't want to do. No flowers in the world can fix that." "What can?" he asked. His voice was serious. "Only your actions," she replied. "Not purchases, but real actions. But I don't believe you're capable of them. Your world is a world of power, money, and fear. My world," he paused, choosing his words, April looked at the bag in her hands. The smell of food reminded her of yesterday's humiliation, but now it was joined by fear of unexpected help. He looked at her, and there was something new in his eyes. Not anger, not calculation, but genuine bewilderment. Now I know there's a woman out there who isn't afraid to tell me the truth to my face. And I like that. Amy raised her eyebrows in surprise. She had expected anything but such directness. I like you, Ami, he said simply. With you, I feel different. Not like a boss, not like a master, just like a man. It's a strange feeling, but I don't find it unpleasant. She listened to him, and her heart began to soften. Not because he paid her a compliment, but because he spoke sincerely. It was obvious. Okay, she said. Let's say so. But feelings aren't enough. You have to prove you can change. Not in words, but in deeds. How? He asked again. Start small, Amy said. Leave me alone. He frowned. I don't want to leave you. I don't mean forever, she clarified. Let's just forget this incident, she whispered. You go, I'll stay, and we'll never see each other again. It'll be better for everyone. Control was second nature to him. Okay, he said with difficulty. I'll try. Second, Amy continued, if you really want to be a part of my life, you have to understand what I value. And I value kindness, honesty, respect. I don't value power or money. That's why your gifts. They mean nothing to me. They're even annoying. What should we do then? He asked with genuine bewilderment. Ask yourself, what would a normal, good man do to show a woman he cares? She prompted. Not a mafia guy, not a boss, just a regular guy. He paused. It was the most difficult question he had been asked in years. I don't know, he admitted again. I haven't been just a man for a very long time. Then learn, Amy said softly. But you won't learn next to me. You'll give me time. She tried to return the bag, but Minho didn't take it. His arms remained relaxed at his sides. The session was over. Jinho realized this wasn't a negotiation where he could bargain. These were her terms, and he had to accept them. He paid for dinner, and they left the restaurant. It was already dark outside. Can I walk you home? He asked. Amy replied, that would be against the rules. Goodbye, Jinho. She called him by his name, his real name, which he had never told her, but which she apparently recognized herself, and she turned and walked away without looking back. He watched her go, and for the first time in his life, he didn't try to stop her. He simply watched her walk away and felt something inside him break and something new begin to grow. The next day, he didn't go to her house. It was incredibly difficult. Every instinct screamed at him to be in control, to know where she was, what she was doing. But he kept his word. Instead, he went to his office. Eat, he said simply. You're hungry. At his people, at his affairs, and it all seemed alien and meaningless. Money, power, threats. All of it was dust compared to one honest look from a woman who wasn't afraid of him. A week passed. Amy was living her life and was surprised to notice that she was no longer being followed. She felt freer, and secretly, she was a little disappointed that he had given in so easily. Maybe he couldn't change, but one day, returning from the store, she saw a strange woman with a child at her front door. The woman was crying. Amy asked what had happened. It turned out the woman had lost her wallet with the last of her money. She didn't know how to get home and buy food for the child. Without thinking twice, Ami gave her money for a taxi and some for food. The woman thanked her, almost falling to her knees. Amy entered the entryway and went up to her room. His words sounded not like an order, but a statement of fact. There was neither pity nor condescension in them. The door. She picked it up. There was no name or note on the envelope. It contained a wad of cash, the same amount she had just given to the stranger. And then Ami understood everything. He hadn't been following her. But somehow he'd found out about her actions. Maybe he'd been nearby by chance. Maybe he had other sources. But something else was important. He hadn't bought her an expensive gift. He'd simply given her back her own money. Without further ado, without any attempt to show off, he'd simply done it. And at that moment, Amy smiled for the first time in a long time, thinking about him. Maybe there really was something in him worth giving him a chance. But she wasn't going to do it easily. She put the envelope on the table and decided to wait. Wait for his next move. But now she waited not with fear, but with interest. Jin-ho was sitting in his office, looking at the reports. But only one thought was in his head. She helped a stranger, she's kind, and I want to be worthy of her kindness. And this desire was stronger than all his previous goals combined. Several weeks had passed since that evening when they had talked in the restaurant. Ami tried to live her life, working, meeting with friends, going out. But thoughts of Jin-ho wouldn't leave her. She caught herself waiting for his next move. But there was nothing around. No surveillance, no gifts, no messages. He really had kept his word and left her alone, and that surprised her. One evening, she sat at home, going over everything that had happened. She recalled his face in the restaurant, serious, focused, listening to her every word. She recalled how he'd confessed his attraction to her, and how he'd agreed to her terms, even though it must have been incredibly difficult for a man of his type. And then she understood. April looked at him, trying to understand. This man was challenging her entire understanding of how the world worked. Nothing in her life had ever been free. Everything had to be paid for, fought for, sacrificed. The same one he'd used to text her that time in the cafe. She typed, "Tomorrow at 7 o'clock, park by the river, come." She hit send before changing her mind. The answer came almost instantly. "Okay, I will." The next day, Jin-ho arrived at the park 20 minutes before the appointed time. He was as nervous as a boy. He glanced at his watch and at the path she was supposed to take. And then he saw her. She was walking leisurely, wearing a simple dress and a light jacket. His heart started beating faster. They met at a bench overlooking the river. At first, they were silent, looking at the water. "You came," Amy finally said. "I said I'd come," he replied. She turned to him, her face serious. "I've been thinking about you for a long time," she said. "But why?" She couldn't help herself. "Why are you helping a stranger?" "Convinced me," Amy said quietly. "I see how hard you're trying. I see that you're listening to me, and no man in my life has ever tried for me the way you have." She paused, looking him straight in the eyes. "That's why I want to give us a chance. A real chance. Not as victim and persecutor, but as two adults. I want to go on a real date with you." Jin-ho listened to her, and his face gradually changed. First he looked hopeful, then distrustful, and then something inside him broke. He lowered his head. His shoulders shook slightly. Amy realized with surprise that this strong, dangerous man was crying. He tried to hold back, but tears streamed down his cheeks. He wiped them away with his hand, turning away in embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he whispered hoarsely. Amy asked softly. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a vulnerability she would never have expected to see in him. "Nobody." Minho tilted his head slightly, something flickering in his eyes that she couldn't quite place. "Something right." He took a deep breath, trying to pull himself together. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "I'm afraid of making a mistake. I'm afraid of losing you. You've become more important to me than anything. More important than money, than power, than anything." He looked at the river, then back at her. "I'm so sorry it all started out so badly. I'm so sorry I scared you. I'm so sorry I made you suffer. If only I could turn back time." "But you can't," Amy said softly. "I know," he nodded. "But I'm grateful to fate that you gave me a chance, even after everything I've done. You have no idea how important this is to me." He took her hand, his fingers warm and trembling slightly. "I promise I will be worthy of your trust. I will be who you want me to be." Amy looked at him and saw sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't the cold, calculating gaze she remembered from their first meeting. "Because I can," he replied, "and because I must. It's my choice. But remember, this is your last chance. If you betray my trust again—" "I understand," he said quickly. "That won't happen. I'd rather die than hurt you again." They sat on a bench, holding hands, and watched the setting sun. For the first time, there was no fear, no threats, no mistrust between them. There was only a quiet understanding and hope for a new beginning. "So where's our first real date?" Amy asked with a slight smile. "Wherever you want," Jinho answered. "You choose." Then, "Let's just walk. Talk. Like normal people." He nodded. For him, this was the best date ever, just being with her. Not controlling, not possessing, just being there. They stood up and walked down the park path. And in that moment, Jinho realized he felt happier than he ever had in his entire life. All his wealth, all his power, couldn't compare to this simple moment. Walking next to a woman who saw him not as a mafia boss, but as a human being. And Ami looked at him and thought that perhaps the most unexpected stories sometimes have the most beautiful endings. The main thing is to give them a chance. 6 months passed. For Jinho, these were the strangest and happiest months of his life. He still ran his business, but now everything had changed. He no longer solved problems with threats. He began listening to people. At first, his subordinates didn't understand what was happening. They expected a trick, but then they saw that their boss had calmed down. He still made firm decisions, but without the former cruelty. Ami continued to draw children's books, but now she had her strictest and most loving critic. Jinho would sit in the evenings and watch her work. He didn't understand art, but he understood her. "Eat first," he repeated. "Hunger is keeping me from thinking, then we'll decide what to do next." "What do you think?" she asked, showing him the new drawing. "I think it's beautiful," he answered honestly. "Like everything you do." They went on real dates. To the movies, where he watched a comedy and laughed for the first time in 20 years. To regular cafes, where he learned to eat pizza with his hands instead of a knife and fork. Ami showed him the simple joys of life that he'd never known. One day they were walking through the Feno's market, and Amy wanted ice cream. Jinho bought 10 scoops at once. Every flavor they had. Amy laughed. "One is enough. We can't eat that much." "But you don't know which flavor you'll like better," he said seriously. "We'll find out by dividing one portion in half," she replied, taking his hand. This was a new lesson for him. You don't have to own everything at once. You can share. Gradually, he began to change. April slowly lowered her hand holding the bag. She knew this man wouldn't back down so easily, and for the first time in a long time, she felt not only fear, but also a glimmer of hope. Maybe there really are moments in life when help comes without strings attached. Maybe sometimes it's worth simply accepting it. April silently finished her tom yum. This time, it was hot, fragrant, and perfect. Under its spicy warmth, the trembling in her hands gradually subsided and her thoughts cleared. She changed into clean clothes, brushed the tears from her cheeks, and taking a deep breath, walked out into the hallway where Minho was waiting. "You showed me there's life beyond money and power." Sometimes the past would come back to haunt him. One day, one of his old partners came to his office, a rude, cruel man. He began threatening him, demanding a higher percentage. The old Jinho would have dealt with him in 5 minutes, but the new Jinho just looked at him and said, "Go away. I don't do things like that anymore." He didn't ask if she was ready. He simply nodded toward the dark sedan parked right outside the entrance. It was an expensive car, but unremarkable, like everything else around it. When he opened the door for her, she paused for a moment, still hesitant. Had once taken place. Sometimes Amy caught herself afraid of waking up and realizing it was all a dream. That he would become that scary man from the cafe again. But every morning she woke up and saw his sleeping face. Calm, without the wrinkles of tension. And she understood that this was reality. One day she asked him, "Don't you ever get bored in this ordinary life? After your old one, full of dangers?" He laughed. "What kind of ordinary life is this? Every day with you is a new adventure, just different, more real." They learned to trust each other. He no longer stalked her. She no longer checked his phone. They built something neither of them had ever had before. A real relationship, based not on fear or profit, but on love and respect. And the most amazing thing was, it worked. His business didn't collapse without a hitch. Her creativity blossomed. They found a balance between two worlds, creating their own. And as they walked down the street, hand in hand, no one could have guessed that this calm man and smiling woman had once met in the darkness of a cafe, where one held a gun under the table and the other trembled with fear. Now they were simply two people who had found each other against all odds. And that was their greatest happiness.